I'll give you my Corvette if you can drive. The millionaire mocked the old man, but the old man made him shut up. Support our channel by hitting that like button and drop a comment letting us know what city you're watching from. And let's dive into our story. The intoxicating scent of hand-stitched Italian leather from the 2025 Corvette Z06 in metallic midnight blue mingled with the expensive perfumes of the elite guests, creating an atmosphere of pure luxury that hung heavy over the most exclusive automotive showcase of the year at the Beverly Hills Galleria. The grand atrium of Beverly Hills Galleria sparkled beneath cascading crystal chandeliers imported from Prague, each one casting rainbow prisms across the polished marble floors below. It was a perfect Saturday afternoon in Southern California, and the Supercars of Tomorrow 2025 exhibition drew the West Coast's wealthiest like moths to a flame. Among the gleaming machines positioned on elevated glass platforms, a midnight blue Corvette 06 commanded attention like a crown jewel under the spotlights. Marcus Wellington Hayes, 30 years old and worth more than some small countries, moved through the crowd with the fluid confidence of someone who had never heard the word no spoken seriously in his direction. His bespoke Savile Row suit in charcoal grey hugged his athletic frame perfectly, while his limited edition Audemars Piguet watch caught the light with every gesture he made. The perfectly styled sandy brown hair and that practiced smile he'd perfected since prep school completed the image of a tech billionaire who treated the world like his personal playground. "This beauty right here is my latest toy," Marcus announced to a circle of social media influencers orbiting around him like satellites around a planet, running his manicured fingers along the Corvette's flawless paint job. Supercharged V8, pushing 700 horses, 0 to 60 in under 2.5 seconds. Only set me back about 120, but when you understand performance like I do, price becomes irrelevant. Madison, a platinum blonde 25-year-old, poured into a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, filmed everything with her rose gold iPhone while batting her surgically enhanced eyelashes. "Oh my God, Marcus, you absolutely have to teach me how to handle something this powerful," she purred, making sure her followers could hear every breathy word. "Sweetheart, this isn't for just anyone," Marcus replied, puffing out his chest with obvious pride. "It takes natural racing instincts, serious technical knowledge, and above all else," he paused for maximum dramatic effect, "genuine courage." Sarah Mitchell, a 46-year-old investigative journalist from the Los Angeles Times, watched the entire performance with the practiced eye of someone who had covered hundreds of similar events throughout her career. Her understated black blazer and sensible shoes stood in stark contrast to the ostentatious display surrounding her. She jotted notes in a worn leather notebook, gathering material for her upcoming exposé on wealth inequality in modern America. Outside in the real world, beyond the mall's climate-controlled paradise, life moved at a different pace entirely. Among the rows of parked vehicles in the blazing California sun, a weathered man of approximately 68 years moved methodically from car to car with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to become invisible when necessary. Frank Thompson, known to regulars simply as Old Timer, wore a faded navy blue work shirt with sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms mapped with old scars and calluses that told stories of a lifetime spent working with his hands. Frank's face was a roadmap of experience that few people bothered to read anymore. The deep lines around his steel gray eyes spoke of decades squinting against bright lights and desert sun. His silver mustache, always neatly trimmed despite his circumstances, revealed a man who still maintained his personal standards even when the world had written him off. But those eyes held something special, a spark that ignited whenever he caught sight of a well-built machine. "Afternoon, sir. Care for a wash and detail?" he'd ask politely of car owners, always maintaining that respectful tone he'd learned growing up in small-town Georgia. Most people looked right through him, as if he were made of glass. Others tossed crumpled bills without making eye contact. But Frank never lost that fundamental courtesy that defined his character. It was then that his experienced eyes spotted the Corvette through the mall's floor-to-ceiling windows. Even from the parking lot, the midnight blue machine gleamed like a sapphire under the artificial lighting. Frank stopped what he was doing completely and stood mesmerized, studying every curve and line with the intensity of a master craftsman examining a work of art. His weathered fingers unconsciously traced patterns in the air, following the car's aerodynamic contours through the glass barrier. Joe Martinez, the 74-year-old security guard who'd been working the mall's main entrance for the past 12 years, noticed Frank's transfixed expression. "Beautiful ride, ain't it, old-timer?" he commented, walking over to join his friend. "Absolutely stunning, Joe," Frank replied without shifting his gaze from the vehicle. "That's a Z06 with the LT6 naturally aspirated flat-plane crank V8. Carbon fiber aero package, magnetic ride control suspension, Brembo carbon ceramic brakes." His voice carried a depth of technical knowledge that surprised even Joe, who thought he knew Frank pretty well. "You sure know your cars, don't you?" Joe asked, genuinely curious about this side of his friend he'd never seen before. Frank smiled with a sadness that seemed to weigh down his entire face. "I know a thing or two," was all he said before returning to his work. Inside the mall, Marcus was in full show-off mode for his captive audience. "You want to know what separates a real Corvette from every other so-called sports car on the market?" he asked rhetorically, gesturing grandly at his automotive trophy. "It's pure American muscle heritage, refined power under complete control, the absolute pinnacle of Detroit engineering excellence. Have you ever raced professionally, Marcus?" asked a young venture capitalist from the gathered crowd. "Absolutely," Marcus lied without missing a beat. "Multiple track days, several amateur circuit competitions. My father always said I had a natural gift for speed and precision." Sarah raised an eyebrow slightly. During her research on Marcus for the article, she hadn't found any record of racing achievements whatsoever. She decided to file that information away for later use. That's when Madison spotted Frank through the window. "Oh my gosh! Everyone look at that poor old man out there washing cars in this heat. How absolutely heartbreaking." The entire group turned to observe the car detailer. Marcus, always looking for an opportunity to demonstrate his supposed superiority, had what he considered a brilliant idea. "Ladies and gentlemen, how about we have ourselves a little entertainment," he said with a smile that promised trouble. "I'm going to invite that gentleman inside to see what real automotive excellence looks like. I bet he's never been within 50 feet of a machine like this." "Marcus, don't be cruel," Sarah muttered, sensing something unpleasant was about to unfold. "Cruel hardly. I'm about to make this man's entire week. Can you imagine the thrill a simple working man would feel seeing engineering perfection up close?" Marcus replied, already heading toward the mall entrance. Frank was carefully finishing the windows on a Mercedes sedan when he heard someone calling out. "Hey, you there, the car wash guy?" He turned around to see a well-dressed young man waving him over. "You talking to me, sir?" "That's right. Want to see something absolutely incredible? Come on inside with me," Marcus said, motioning for Frank to follow. Joe watched the scene unfold with growing concern. He knew Marcus by reputation and was well aware of the young man's tendency to humiliate others for his own amusement. "Old-timer, you don't have to go if you don't want to," he started to say, but Frank held up a gentle hand. "It's all right, Joe. Let's see what this young fellow wants." Frank followed Marcus into the mall, carrying his cleaning supplies with him. The contrast was jarring. A working man in sun-faded clothes walking through corridors lined with stores selling items that cost more than most people earned in a year, while security guards eyed him suspiciously. When they reached the exhibition area, an uncomfortable silence fell over the crowd. The guests, all dressed in clothes worth thousands of dollars, stared at Frank with a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed distaste. "Everyone!" Marcus announced loudly, making sure he had complete attention. "I'd like you to meet our new friend here. I thought he might enjoy seeing my Corvette up close, since I'm sure he's never experienced anything quite like it before." Madison already had her phone out, recording what she assumed would be viral-worthy content. "This is so sweet of you, Marcus. You're like totally charitable." Frank approached the Corvette slowly, his hands trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from barely contained emotion. When his eyes took in every detail of the machine, something shifted in his entire demeanor. It was like watching a fire that had been banked for years suddenly flare back to life. "Go ahead, get closer," Marcus said condescendingly. "Don't worry, it won't bite. It's just a car." Frank walked around the vehicle with deliberate, measured steps, his trained eye cataloging every detail with the precision of a master mechanic. His experienced gaze caught things that even Marcus had never noticed: the slight misalignment in the front suspension, the telltale signs that the engine had been pushed too hard too soon, subtle indicators that only someone with deep mechanical knowledge would recognize. "Gorgeous, isn't she?" Marcus asked, expecting an effusive response of awe and gratitude. "She certainly is," Frank replied simply, but his voice carried depths that few people present were capable of hearing. Marcus, interpreting the response as simple-minded appreciation, decided to escalate his little performance. "Do you have any idea what this car cost?" "No, sir, I don't," Frank answered politely. $120,000, Marcus proclaimed theatrically, eliciting gasps and impressed murmurs from his audience. "That's more money than someone like you would see in a lifetime." Sarah felt her stomach turn. The humiliation was becoming too explicit, even by the standards of this crowd. That's when Marcus had his most brilliant idea of the afternoon. He pulled the keys from his pocket and dangled them dramatically in front of Frank's weathered face. "You know what I'm going to do," he said, ensuring everyone was paying complete attention. "I'm going to make our friend here an impossible offer." The crowd fell silent. Madison moved her phone closer to capture every word. Marcus raised his voice and declared, "I'll give you my Corvette if you can actually drive it out of here without crashing." The laughter was immediate and overwhelming. Madison filmed frantically, whispering commentary for her followers about the hilarious situation unfolding. Marcus continued his performance with renewed enthusiasm. "That's right, you heard correctly. If this gentleman can actually operate my $120,000 Corvette and drive it out of this mall without so much as scratching the paint, I'll give it to him." The crowd erupted in cruel laughter. Some applauded Marcus's supposed generosity. Others were already pulling out phones to document what they assumed would be a spectacular failure. "Marcus, you're completely insane," shouted a friend from the back. "That poor guy probably doesn't even know where the ignition is." Frank stood perfectly still, staring at the keys swaying in Marcus's hand. His expression was unreadable. He showed no signs of humiliation or anger, just an unsettling calm that began to make some of the more perceptive observers uncomfortable. Sarah studied the old man's face with growing journalistic interest. There was something in those grey eyes that didn't match the situation at all. A quiet confidence that seemed completely at odds with the public shaming he was enduring. "Well?" Marcus taunted, continuing to wave the keys like a hypnotist's pendulum. "What do you say, old-timer? Want to try winning yourself a Corvette?" The entire crowd waited for his response. Some expected him to leave in shame. Others anticipated a pathetic attempt that would provide even more entertainment. Frank Thompson slowly raised his eyes and looked directly at Marcus Wellington Hayes. When he spoke, his voice was clear and steady. "I accept." The silence that followed Frank's acceptance was so complete, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Madison actually stopped recording for several seconds, her mouth hanging open. Marcus blinked repeatedly, clearly not having expected that response. "You accept?" Marcus stammered, trying to maintain his composure in front of his audience. "Are you sure about this? This is a 700 horsepower machine. It's not some beat-up pickup truck." Frank took a step forward and extended his calloused hand. "The keys, if you please." The crowd murmured uneasily. Sarah moved closer, every journalistic instinct she possessed firing at once. There was something about this man that absolutely did not fit with his appearance. Marcus, feeling like he was losing control of his carefully orchestrated humiliation, tried to backpedal. "Look, this was just a joke, old man. You don't need to—" "You gave your word in front of all these witnesses," Frank interrupted, his voice taking on an authority that surprised everyone present. "A man's only as good as his word." The comment hit Marcus like a slap across the face. Several guests began whispering among themselves. The entertainment was taking a turn that no one had anticipated. "Fine," Marcus said, attempting to sound nonchalant. "If you insist on making a fool of yourself, who am I to stop you?" With an exaggerated flourish, he tossed the keys onto the marble floor at Frank's feet. The metallic clatter echoed through the space, like a gauntlet being thrown down. Frank bent down slowly and picked up the keys with the care one might show handling something sacred. His work-hardened hands held the key fob with a reverence that Sarah found impossible to ignore. It was as if he were holding something precious beyond measure. "Someone needs to clear a path to the exit," Frank said calmly, surveying the space around the car. "Seriously?" Marcus scoffed. "You're actually going to attempt this?" Without responding, Frank walked to the driver's side of the Corvette. He ran his hand along the door handle, feeling its perfect engineering. When he opened the door, the scent of premium leather filled his nostrils, bringing back memories he'd kept locked away for decades. He adjusted the seat with practiced movements, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. His hands found the steering wheel and caressed it gently. The fine leather felt foreign against his calloused palms, but somehow familiar too. "He's actually getting in the car," Madison whispered, resuming her recording. Frank started the engine. The roar of the supercharged V8 filled the exhibition space with raw power that made the floor vibrate beneath everyone's feet. It was a sound that demanded respect, a mechanical symphony that spoke of controlled violence. But what happened next left everyone absolutely stunned. Instead of lurching forward or stalling out as everyone expected, Frank tested the throttle gently. The engine responded with perfectly modulated bursts of power. He checked all the mirrors, familiarized himself with the controls, tested the clutch feel. "This man knows exactly what he's doing," Sarah whispered to herself, fascination growing by the second. Frank put the car in gear and began to move. But it wasn't the amateur, clumsy driving everyone anticipated. It was a masterclass in vehicle control. The Corvette glided smoothly between the display platforms, navigating obstacles with surgical precision. "This isn't possible," Marcus muttered, his cocky smile vanishing completely. When Frank reached the narrow exit where space was most limited, he did something no one saw coming. He floored the accelerator and executed a perfect controlled drift, making the Corvette slide sideways with the rear tires singing against the marble floor, but never losing control for even a microsecond. The crowd gasped, and several people actually applauded. The maneuver had been executed with the skill of a professional race car driver. Frank drove the Corvette out of the mall like he'd been born to do it. Outside, he performed a series of maneuvers that left pedestrians frozen in amazement. Acceleration, braking, tight cornering, all with absolute mastery that defied any logical explanation. Marcus ran after him, followed by the entire crowd from the exhibition. When they reached the parking area, they found Frank standing calmly beside the Corvette, engine off, keys in his outstretched hand. How did you do that?" Marcus stammered, completely bewildered. Frank opened the hood with confident, practiced movements. "Your car's got a problem with the fuel injection mapping," he said matter-of-factly, pointing to a specific component. "Also got a coolant leak right there in the upper radiator hose, and your brake pads are worn unevenly on the left side." Dead silence. Marcus stared at Frank like he was seeing a ghost. "You're making all that up," Marcus mumbled. But there was no conviction in his voice. Frank continued his technical assessment. "The rear differential is making noise because the gear oil's contaminated. Needs changing soon or you'll have expensive problems. And your front right shock absorber is blown. That's why the car pulls slightly left at highway speeds. Sarah moved closer, completely captivated. How could you possibly know all that? Frank looked at her with a sad smile that seemed to carry the weight of decades. Engines talk, ma'am. You just have to know how to listen. Marcus was starting to panic. Everything the old man was saying made perfect sense. He had noticed some of those problems, but chosen to ignore them. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, arrogance giving way to nervous curiosity. Frank closed the hood and leaned against the car like an old friend. "Name's Frank Thompson. And a long time ago I used to race." "Race where?" Sarah pressed, her journalistic instincts in overdrive. Frank looked toward the distant horizon, lost in memories that seemed both precious and painful. NASCAR, some Indy car, few international circuits. Was a different world back then. The revelation hit the group like a bomb. Madison kept filming, but now with a reverence that hadn't existed before. "You're lying," Marcus said, but his voice shook. "If you were a professional driver, you wouldn't be washing cars." Frank met his gaze with unsettling calm. "Life's got a way of changing directions on you, son. Sometimes you lose everything and have to start over from scratch." Sarah stepped forward carefully. "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Frank's face tightened as if an old wound had been reopened. "There was an accident. Daytona 500, 22 years ago. I was running third when everything went wrong." He paused, gathering strength to continue. "My twin brother Jackie was my crew chief, best mechanic who ever lived, and my best friend since we shared the same womb. He was on pit road when my car came apart at 200 miles per hour. Flying debris. He never had a chance." The silence was deafening. Several people looked away, ashamed. Even Madison stopped filming. "I quit racing that day," Frank continued, his voice breaking slightly. "Lost everything after that. Sponsors disappeared, friends stopped calling, started drinking heavy, lost my house, my marriage, everything I'd worked for. Ended up on the streets." Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath him. The story was taking on dimensions he'd never imagined. "But even living rough, I never could stay away from cars completely," Frank said, stroking the Corvette's fender again. "They're part of my soul. That's why I know when an engine's hurting, when something's not running right. It's like recognizing the breathing of someone you love." Sarah was visibly moved. As a journalist, she recognized an extraordinary story when she heard one. "How did you end up detailing cars?" she asked gently. Frank smiled bitterly. "It's honest work. Keeps me alive and lets me stay close to what I love. Every car I clean reminds me of who I used to be." Marcus couldn't process what he was hearing. The man he'd just humiliated was a former NASCAR driver, someone who'd lived the racing world in ways Marcus never could. Joe, who had followed the entire scene, approached Frank. "That's why you always knew so much about cars," he said admiringly. "I always sensed there was something special about you." Frank nodded gratefully. "Thanks for always treating me with respect, Joe. That means more than you know." The crowd began to disperse slowly, but many remained, clearly touched by what they'd witnessed. Marcus stood beside the Corvette, holding the keys Frank had returned, not knowing what to say. It was Madison who broke the silence. "Marcus, you have to keep your promise." Marcus looked at her, confused. "What promise?" "You said you'd give him the car if he could drive it without crashing." Madison reminded him, still recording. "And he drove it better than you ever could." The social pressure was obvious. Several people began agreeing with Madison. Marcus found himself trapped by his own arrogance. I can't just give away a $120,000 car," Marcus sputtered. Frank held up his hand, stopping the argument. "I don't want your car, son." Everyone turned to him in surprise. "I didn't come here to win anything," Frank continued with unshakable dignity. "I came here to work, like I do every day. What happened today was just a reminder of who I used to be." The dignity in Frank's words contrasted sharply with Marcus's desperation to escape his promise. Sarah watched everything, already writing the article that would define her career. "But sir," called out someone from the crowd, "the young man gave his word. A person should honor their commitments." Frank looked at Marcus with a mixture of understanding and disappointment. "A man also needs to learn when he's made a mistake, son. It's not the car you owe me. It's an apology." The request hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus stared at the older man, feeling shame for the first time in his privileged life. Phone cameras continued recording every second of his discomfort. I didn't know," Marcus began, his voice trembling. "I had no idea who you were." "Would it have mattered?" Frank asked quietly. "If I'd just been a regular car washer, would I have deserved less respect?" The question cut deep. Sarah moved closer, recognizing the pivotal moment. Several people in the group looked down, uncomfortable with their own complicity. Marcus swallowed hard. For the first time in his pampered existence, he was being forced to face real consequences. "No," he admitted, barely audible. "It wouldn't have mattered." "Then," Frank pressed without aggression, just with the serenity of someone who'd suffered greatly and learned the value of dignity. Marcus looked around at all the expectant faces. Madison kept filming, but there was something different in her expression now. Not cruel amusement, but genuine curiosity about how this would resolve. "I apologize," Marcus said finally, his voice cracking. "I'm truly sorry for what I did. It was wrong." Frank nodded slowly. "I accept your apology, son, and I appreciate it." Sarah felt compelled to speak up. As a journalist, she'd witnessed many stories, but few had moved her like this one. "Mr. Thompson," she said, approaching respectfully, "I'm Sarah Mitchell from the Los Angeles Times. I'd very much like to talk with you about your story." Frank looked at her suspiciously. "What for, Mom?" "Because it's a story that needs telling," Sarah replied honestly. "People need to understand that behind every person they meet on the street, there's a complete life, a unique history, lost dreams and hard-won battles." Madison lowered her phone for the first time all afternoon. "Can I ask you something?" she said to Frank. "You mentioned racing at Daytona. I research motorsports for my content. What was your full racing name?" "Frank Lightning Thompson," he replied simply. Madison began frantically searching on her phone. Within seconds, her eyes went wide. "Oh my God," she said, voice filled with awe. "I found him. He's telling the truth. Frank Lightning Thompson, 47 NASCAR Cup Series wins between 1985 and 2003. Three-time champion." Total silence. Marcus felt the earth give way beneath his feet. He'd just humiliated not just any former driver, but a NASCAR legend. "There's more," Madison continued, reading aloud. "Says here he retired suddenly in 2003 after a fatal accident at Daytona, where his twin brother and crew chief Jackie Thompson was killed by flying debris. Never returned to racing." People gathered around to see the phone screen. Old photos showed a younger Frank, smiling and triumphant, holding trophies and champagne, surrounded by fans and sponsors. "My God," whispered a woman from the group. "I remember him. My husband was a huge fan. Had his poster in the garage." Marcus was in complete shock. My father. My father always talked about you." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Your father?" "William Hayes Sr. He was obsessed with NASCAR. Never missed a race on TV," Marcus explained, pieces falling into place in his confused mind. "He had all your memorabilia. Used to say you were the most naturally gifted driver America ever produced." The revelation hit Frank like lightning. His knees nearly buckled. "William Hayes, the software pioneer?" Frank asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, he died 4 years ago," Marcus replied, tears forming in his eyes. "Left behind an entire collection of racing memorabilia. Even has helmets you signed." Frank closed his eyes, breathing deeply. "Your father, he visited me in the hospital after Jackie's accident. One of the last people who believed I'd ever race again. Offered to sponsor my comeback." Marcus gasped. "Really?" "I turned him down," Frank continued painfully. I was too broken up over losing Jackie, but he insisted, left me his business card, said when I was ready, just call. I kept that card for years. Tears flowed freely down Marcus's face now. The irony was devastating. He just humiliated his own father's hero, the man his father had tried to help years earlier. Why didn't you call him? Marcus asked, sobbing. Frank smiled sadly. Pride, fear, depression. By the time I finally decided to make that call, I found out he'd passed away. Sarah watched everything with professional fascination and human emotion. This story had layers upon layers of irony and redemption potential. Joe approached Frank discreetly. "Old-timer, you've always been more than you seemed," he said with genuine admiration. "Now I understand why you always treated every car like it was precious." The surrounding crowd had completely changed its attitude. What began as a cruel entertainment spectacle had transformed into a profound lesson about snap judgments and second chances. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus said, wiping his eyes, "my father used to say you were the most technical driver he'd ever seen. Said you didn't just race, you understood machines like no one else could." Frank nodded emotionally. "Your father was a good man, Marcus. One of the few who saw past the trophies and victories. He understood that a real driver needs heart, not just speed." Sarah realized she was witnessing something much bigger than a simple misunderstanding at a social event. This was a story about redemption, about how destiny sometimes places us exactly where we need to be. "May I ask another question?" Madison said, now completely transformed from her earlier attitude. "Why didn't you ever try to return to racing, even after dealing with the loss?" Frank looked at the sky as if searching for the right words in the clouds. "Because I lost faith in myself. When you lose someone you love because of what you do best in life, it becomes pretty hard to find reasons to continue." "But you still have the gift," Marcus insisted. "I saw how you handled my car. That doesn't just disappear." "The gift remains," Frank agreed, "but your heart has to be in the right place. Mine was buried with Jackie for too many years." A woman from the crowd who'd been quiet until now stepped forward. "Excuse me, but I'm a trauma counselor who works with people who've survived terrible losses. Have you ever considered that your brother would want you to use your talent to help others?" Frank looked at her with growing interest. "How so?" "Teaching," she replied simply. "Sharing all that knowledge you've accumulated. There are so many young people out there who dream of racing, who need someone who truly understands both cars and life." Marcus felt something powerful stirring inside him. An idea began forming, tentative at first, but gaining strength with each passing second. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice still shaky with emotion, what if we could do something together?" Frank looked at him curiously. "What did you have in mind?" Marcus took a deep breath before continuing. "I have money, but no real knowledge about cars. You have all the knowledge in the world, but no resources. What if we combined both?" "I'm not following," Frank admitted. "A racing school," Marcus explained, his voice gaining enthusiasm. "Not just any driving school, but a place where people really learn, where you could teach not just how to drive, but how to understand cars, how to respect them." Sarah smiled, immediately recognizing the extraordinary potential. "It would be a beautiful way to honor both your brother's memory and your father's," she said to both men. Frank remained silent for a long moment. The idea resonated in his mind, awakening feelings he hadn't experienced in decades. "You'd really do that?" he asked finally. "Even after everything that happened here today?" Marcus nodded emphatically. "Especially because of what happened today. I've learned more about myself in the past 30 minutes than in my entire previous life, and I learned it from the man my father most admired in the world." Madison, still filming discreetly, spoke up. "Could I suggest something? What if we documented this entire journey, show people how this partnership was born?" Sarah agreed immediately. "It would be an incredible story." The meeting of two generations, united by passion for automobiles and the memory of a man who believed in second chances. Frank looked at the Corvette, then at Marcus, then at the group of people gathered around them. For the first time in 22 years, he felt something like hope stirring. "Jackie always told me I shouldn't keep my knowledge to myself," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Said teaching was a way to multiply happiness in the world." Marcus extended his hand. "Partners." Frank studied the offered hand. It was soft, belonging to someone who'd never done hard physical labor, but in that moment it represented so much more than privilege. It represented an extraordinary opportunity to start over, to give real meaning to years of pain and accumulated knowledge. "Partners," he replied, gripping Marcus's hand firmly. The group erupted in spontaneous applause. Joe smiled proudly like a father watching his son graduate. Sarah was already mentally planning the series of articles she'd write about this extraordinary story. "But I have one non-negotiable condition," Frank said, maintaining the handshake. Marcus tensed. "What's that?" "No special treatment for you at the school. If we're going to teach for real, you're going to learn for real. Starting from absolute zero, just like any other student." Marcus laughed, feeling an enormous weight lift from his shoulders. "I accept completely. Actually, I think I need to learn a lot more than I ever imagined." Madison continued recording, now with tears of emotion in her eyes. "Guys, you have no idea how beautiful this is. It's like the universe conspired to bring you together at exactly the right moment." Sarah approached Frank. "Mr. Thompson, may I follow this entire journey, write about how everything develops?" "Absolutely," Frank replied, "but with one condition: tell the whole story. Not just the beautiful parts, but the mistakes, the learning process, all the difficulties too." "Especially the difficulties," Sarah agreed. "They're what make victory truly meaningful." Marcus looked around at all the smiling faces. "You know what's the most incredible thing about all this?" "What?" several people asked simultaneously. "That it all started with my arrogance, my cruel desire to humiliate someone, and it ended up becoming the greatest lesson in humility of my entire life." Frank smiled wisely. "Sometimes you have to fall pretty far to learn how to really fly." 8 months later, the sound of powerful engines filled the morning air at Thompson Hayes Racing Academy, located on 40 acres of prime real estate in the Mojave Desert outside Las Vegas. The sun was rising over the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold that reflected off the fresh asphalt of their professional-grade training circuit. Frank Thompson, now wearing a crisp new instructor's uniform with the school's logo embroidered on the chest, walked along the track, observing his students with the keen eye of a master craftsman. His silver hair was neatly styled, his mustache perfectly trimmed, and there was something completely different in his steel-gray eyes. A light that hadn't existed for 22 years had returned to stay permanently. "Hand position on the wheel," he called out to a 17-year-old girl practicing cornering techniques in a specially prepared Camaro. 9 and 3 o'clock, never 10 and 2. And feel how the car communicates with you through the steering wheel. Marcus, on the other side of the track, watched the scene with pure satisfaction radiating from his face. He also wore work clothes now, but his were stained with grease and oil, the result of a morning spent in the Academy's mechanical workshop, learning the fundamentals just as Frank had insisted from day one. Every driver must understand exactly how the machine they're controlling actually works, Frank had explained during that first lesson. You can't truly love something you don't know inside and out. Sarah Mitchell arrived carrying her professional recording equipment. Over the past 8 months, she had meticulously documented every step of the Academy's creation, following the remarkable transformations of both Frank and Marcus. Her series of articles about the unlikely partnership had gone viral nationally, inspiring thousands of people across America. "How's business today?" she asked Marcus, who approached while cleaning his hands on a shop rag. "Completely booked solid," Marcus replied, his face glowing with genuine fulfillment. We have a waiting list stretching 4 months out. Frank is an absolutely phenomenal instructor. The students don't just learn to drive, they learn to live better. Sarah smiled. Marcus's transformation had been truly spectacular to witness. The arrogant, spoiled young man had evolved into a conscious entrepreneur who worked hard and treated everyone with genuine respect. "And your own lessons. How are you progressing?" Sarah asked. Marcus laughed with pure joy. "Frank doesn't cut me any slack just because I'm his business partner. Actually, I think he's harder on me than any of the other students." "That's because you need more work than most," Frank called out, having overheard the conversation as he approached. "Spoiled rich boy," he added, but with an affectionate smile that showed the deep friendship he'd developed with Marcus. Sarah turned on her camera. "Mr. Thompson, could you tell us how you feel today, 8 months after that encounter at the mall?" Frank stopped and surveyed the entire academy spread out before him. Young people of every age and background were scattered across the facility, some driving prepared cars on the track, others working with cutting-edge simulators, all under the supervision of instructors he had personally trained. "You know, Sarah," he began thoughtfully, "for 22 years, I believed my story had ended permanently on that terrible day at Daytona, that I'd lost not only my brother Jackie, but also my entire purpose in life." He paused, watching a group of teenagers listening intently as an instructor explained the physics of aerodynamics. "Today, I realized that maybe that encounter with Marcus was life's way of showing me I still had so much to offer. That all the knowledge I'd accumulated over the decades shouldn't die with me." Marcus approached them, "and I discovered that having money without real purpose is the emptiest way to exist imaginable." Madison arrived at that moment, but she now ran a YouTube channel focused exclusively on inspirational stories. Her transformation had been remarkable too. Superficial content had given way to genuinely meaningful material. "Guys!" she shouted excitedly, waving her hands. "I just got the most incredible phone call." Everyone gathered around curiously. "Netflix wants to produce a full documentary about you two," she announced, breathing heavily from excitement. "They want to tell the entire story, from the mall encounter to right now." Frank and Marcus exchanged meaningful looks. Fame wasn't something either man sought, but they recognized the transformative power of their story. "If this can inspire even one person not to judge others by their appearance," Frank said, "it's completely worth it. And if it proves that everyone deserves a genuine second chance," Marcus added. Sarah turned off her camera and smiled. "You know this story changed my career too, right?" "How so?" Marcus asked. "After the articles about you two, I specialized in human transformation stories. I discovered this is infinitely more rewarding than covering empty social events." Joe Martinez, who now worked as the Academy's head of security, a job Frank had insisted on creating for him, approached the group. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson, but there's a gentleman here who wants to speak with you." Everyone turned to see an elegantly dressed man in his 60s approaching. Frank recognized him immediately, and his expression changed. "Dale Earnhardt Jr., Frank murmured, referring to the NASCAR legend and team owner. "Frank Lightning Thompson," the man said, extending his hand warmly. "I heard you came back to the racing world." "In a way," Frank replied, shaking the offered hand. "I'm here to make you an offer," Dale explained. "We're organizing a special Legends race next year. Iconic drivers who defined eras. Your name tops our most wanted list." The group fell into complete silence. It was an opportunity no driver of Frank's generation would ever refuse. Frank looked at the track where his students continued training, then at Marcus, Sarah, and the others. "I appreciate the offer tremendously, Dale, but my place is here now." "Frank," Marcus interrupted, "you can't turn this down. It's your chance to race again." Frank smiled. "Marcus, I never stopped racing. I just changed disciplines. Now I compete to see how many lives I can transform positively, how many dreams I can help make real." Dale persisted. "Think about it carefully. It's a race at Daytona, on the track where Where I lost Jackie, Frank completed. I know exactly, and that's precisely why I can't accept, but I truly appreciate the invitation. After Dale left, Sarah approached Frank. Are you completely certain about your decision? Frank nodded. Absolutely. I've learned there are different kinds of victory, Sarah. Mine today is watching an arrogant young man transform into a person of character, he said, looking at Marcus. It's seeing kids from struggling families earn scholarships here and discover they have natural talent for racing. It's honoring Jackie's memory in a way that would make him proud. Marcus put his hand on his friend and mentor's shoulder. Frank, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you think your brother would approve of all this? Frank looked up at the clear blue sky, where white clouds drifted lazily. You know, Marcus, sometimes I feel him right here with me, especially when I see the smile on a student's face who just discovered they can control a car at high speed. Jackie always said happiness is the only thing that multiplies when you share it. Madison, who had remained quiet during the entire conversation, finally spoke. You want to know what I think is the most incredible thing about this whole story? What? Several people asked at once. That it all started with an attempt at humiliation and ended up creating something so beautiful, so meaningful. It's like the universe took our worst intentions and transformed them into the best possible outcome. Sarah nodded. That's the power of redemption. We all have the capacity to change, to grow, to become better people. The sun was now high in the desert sky and the track buzzed with activity. Children, teenagers, and adults of every age and social background shared the same space, united by their passion for automobiles and the mutual respect that Frank had managed to create there. You know, Frank said, taking in the entire scene, when I was washing cars that afternoon, I never imagined I'd find not just a second chance, but a whole new family. Marcus smiled, his eyes misting over. And I never imagined that humiliating someone could turn into the best decision of my entire life. It wasn't the humiliation, Frank corrected gently. It was having the courage to recognize the mistake and want to make it right. Sarah put away her camera equipment for good. She had enough material for dozens of articles, but more importantly, she had witnessed one of the most beautiful human transformations of her career. The day continued with classes, laughter, engines roaring, and dreams being fulfilled. Thompson Hayes Racing Academy had become much more than a place to learn driving. It was a symbol that everyone deserves respect. Everyone has a story worth telling, and everyone is capable of starting over. When the sun set that evening, Frank stood alone on the track for a few minutes. He looked at the empty grandstands and whispered, "Thank you, Jackie, for showing me that love doesn't die, it just changes form." A gentle breeze stirred, moving the Academy's flags, and Frank smiled. For the first time in 22 years, he felt completely whole again. This story teaches us that we should never judge a person by their appearance or current circumstances. Each individual carries within them a wealth of experiences, knowledge, and dreams that aren't visible on the surface. Frank Thompson showed us that dignity doesn't depend on our financial situation, but on how we treat others and how we handle our own adversities. Marcus Wellington Hayes discovered that true wealth isn't found in what we possess, but in what we're capable of building together with other people. His transformation from an arrogant young man into a conscious entrepreneur proves that we all have the capacity for change when we find genuine purpose in our lives. The partnership between them created something greater than either could achieve individually, a place where dreams are cultivated, where social differences disappear in the face of shared passion, where knowledge is transmitted with love, and where second chances transform into new beginnings. If you made it this far, hit that like button to support our channel. Write in the comments which part of the story moved you most, and subscribe to receive more stories that touch hearts and transform perspectives. Share this video with people who believe in the power of redemption and second chances. Always remember, behind every person you encounter exists a unique story, full of struggles, victories, and dreams. Treat everyone with respect, because you never know when you might be standing before someone who could transform your life forever. Until the next story, and thank you so much for being part of this community that believes in the best of humanity.